Hello and welcome. Today, I want to talk to you about SidePro. My name is Hanny. I am the founder. SidePro is an application serverless cloud designed for developers and their side projects. And when I talk about serverless, I really mean don't think about servers. The entire promise of SidePro is to go from code to URL in a single push, and I hope to show you that today. So first thing to get started is I'm going to need to install the SidePro CLI. And I'm going to do that using brew. At the start, I'm going to run brew tap VM farms SidePro to basically tap into the repository. And from there, I can go brew install SidePro. Now, while this works in the background, I want to talk to you about some of its core features. And obviously, we cannot be side project friendly if we are not light on the wallet. It is one of our goals to not require any advanced accounting degree to decipher the monthly bills. There are no metrics like paying per request or API call or event or per user or anything like that. It's very uncomplicated billing with just three primary units: compute, storage, and bandwidth, and that's it. Everything is composed of those three units. Further to that, there are several managed services like databases, MySQL, Postgres, queues, caches, graphs, etc. And they are all managed, but there is no premium for them being managed, meaning there's no extra charge. It's just the raw resources, compute, storage, and bandwidth. And in addition to that, we have a wide support for all the major programming languages and frameworks, such as JavaScript, Node, Python, Go, PHP, Ruby, Python. But I think the most important point to emphasize is that SidePro is not a cloud wrapper. It is not a wrapper around AWS or Azure or Google Cloud. In fact, it's our own hardware. And the reason we do this is because clouds these days are incredibly expensive and very complex. Instead, we take hardware and we strip it down to its bare bones and purpose built it for SidePro specifically, which allows us to save costs, which we pass down to our users, and makes it blazingly fast. So coming back to my terminal, the application, the CLI is now installed. And the first thing I need to do is log into the platform. So I'm going to run SidePro login. And this should take me to my browser window, which allows me to log in using our centralized authentication. This is the centralized auth is used for all the services deployed, so it is only one place to log in. You can also log in with GitHub authentication. And once it's done, it's going to tell me I can close this window. And if I come back to my terminal, everything is ready to go. For run SidePro apps to list the applications, I can see I have nothing installed yet. So I'm actually going to install an Astro site. If you're familiar with Astro, it is a Node.js framework for deploying static sites. Really simple to use. And I'm going to install a brand new site using this pnpm create Astro latest command. So it's going to launch a wizard, ask me some questions, like what kind of template do I want? And I'm going to tell it I want a blog template. Sure, let's use TypeScript. Sure, let's make it strict. I don't need the dependencies right now, and I'll explain that in a second. Yes, let's initialize a new Git repo. And within a few seconds, the application, a brand new application should be installed in this Astro demo directory. And we can see that's the contents are here. I'm not going to do anything else except try to deploy this application. So I'm going to run the command SidePro push, which is how you push or deploy applications to our cloud. And the first thing is I need to give it a name, and it's going to infer a name based on the directory, in this case, Astro Demo, which I'm satisfied with. And it's going to detect that it's an Astro application. So it scanned the source and realized it's an Astro app, and it's asking me if I want to deploy an optimized static site build. Now, I can say no, and it'll work just fine. But saying yes to this deploys an extra Nginx server. Nginx is a blazingly fast web server, and it's going to stick it in front of the application to serve up the static content incredibly fast, which sounds like something I want. So I'm going to click yes, and it's going to give me a chance to review what it's going to do and start the deployment process. So here, what the system is doing is it's bundling up all my source code and shipping it off to the SidePro Cloud. and it's going to actually try to build it. It's going to use a concept of build packs, which is something that Heroku popularized back in the day and has since open source, and there's been many other open source build packs released, which we do make use of. And the entire concept of build packs is they take your source, detect what kind of application you're building or want to build, and do it on your behalf, including installing your dependencies. So that's why before I didn't need to install dependencies, the Node modules directory, because it will do that on my behalf. You can see that this build pack detected that it's a Node application and actually installing this Node version 20 for me automatically, setting some environment variables, optimizing memory, using npm install to install all the dependencies of the source, which I talked about before, installed all the packages, and later on it should actually detect that it's an Astro site as well, and going through the build process for Astro. And later on, it should also install that Nginx server that I spoke about, which is the blazingly fast web server that it'll insert in front of the application process. And now it's going to export the layers to allow it to be cached, so future deploys will be a lot faster. And it says it's done, and it spat a URL back for me. This is an auto-generated URL. I didn't have to use this URL. If you can bring your own if you have your own domain. If you set DNS correctly, you can configure the system to use your DNS. But if you don't have one, one will be generated for you. So it's going to ask me to open the application in my browser, and there we go. It actually is pretty fast to render. And here's the blog, the default blog that it comes from Astro. Let me show you what an update looks like. So if you're familiar with Astro, it's basically just all markdown files. So this is an example of a markdown file of a new page with some front matter, with a title and description. Let me move that into place. So if I go and move it to source, content, blog, and now I'm just going to try pushing again. Because I already had done this before, all my settings are already saved, so it's going to try deploying it again. And this time it should be a little bit faster because of the cached layers. So it's going to stream the build logs for me again. Again, it's going to ship the code to SidePro. Here's all the sources. It's going to restore some of the layers for me. It's going to build the node packages. And it's going to launch the executable, npm install. It's going to build the Astro site for me. And within a few seconds, it should have the deployment with my site. There you go, there's Nginx, reusing a bunch of the layers. And now it's going to get to the application deployment process. This is deploying the app. There you go, it's all done. So if I come back to my page and refresh it, there's my new page that I just deployed. Really quick, really fast. This is an example of delivering on that promise of going from code to URL in a single push. Really, I didn't have to think about anything related to Docker files, Docker containers, infrastructure, or anything like that. I basically just take my source code and I push it. Let me show you an example of how to do things through the web UI. So if I come to our UI and I click on login with my auth provider, again, centralized authentication, it boots me in right away. I actually want to deploy a managed service. So if I come to managed services and I actually check out the catalog, this is an example of all the different catalog items that we have, including APMs, application performance monitoring. Some of them are coming soon. Others are ready to go, like MongoDB, MySQL, Postgres, RabbitMQ, Redis. I'm actually going to deploy a Postgres server. I already have one deployed, but I'm going to deploy a second one to demonstrate it. And I'm going to call this MS-Docs DB2, and I'll explain why in a second. This is an example of where to bind applications to services. Now, whenever you deploy a service and you want to use it with the app, you have to bind it. The reason for this is applications can be bound, a single service can be bound to multiple applications. So I'm not going to do that just yet because I haven't deployed my app that I want to set up with the service over here. So I'm going to leave that blank and allow it to provision. If I come to our documentation site, which is available at docs.sidepro.cloud, and I navigate to platform services and I check out the Postgres documentation, you can see that when this service is bound, there are going to be a series of environment variables that are exported automatically to the any application that is bound. And this is a list of the environment variables that are deployed. So I don't need to worry about things like credentials. This is automatically going to be populated as long as I consume these variables. They're called PSQL, host name, username, password, port, or everything in one with a database URL, which combines all the different variables into a single URL. So you can see that the service has already been deployed. Let me go and deploy a new application. So if I come here and click create, you can see that there are many different sources. So the previous example of the Astra site was using the folder source, which is basically just a local folder that gets pushed to SidePro. But there are many other different types of sources, including archives like zip files. I can even deploy any publicly available Docker container image. If you want to bypass the build pack process, you can actually deploy a Docker container directly to the platform. It also supports deploying straight from Git, which I'm going to do right now. So if I come to an example application that we have, it's actually one from Azure that we have modified, and I come and I copy the link to the Git repo, paste it here, tell it to deploy the main branch. There are some advanced settings which I don't need to mess around with because the defaults are quite sane. This app is called MS Docs, so I need to give it a name. I can adjust additional settings like the number of instances. I can add routes, so this is where I would add custom DNS, but if I leave it blank, it'll auto-generate a URL for me. I can adjust other variables like scaling to 0, auto instrumentation, CPU and memory settings, but I'm going to leave these all blank because the defaults are sane, as I mentioned. What I do need to do is set the environment variables. So I have an env.txt file over here, which is basically just a key value pairs in a file, which the system automatically parses for me. If you recall, the Postgres service has a bunch of environment variables using the PSQL prefix. But my application expects them in a different format, like DB name, DB host, DB user. So I'm simply creating a one-to-one mapping of what the application expects to what the platform provides. So clicking next, this is where I can bind the services. So this is the new one that I deployed in this example. I already had one set up previously, and the reason for this is if you're familiar with any application that has an ORM, like the Python Flask app that I will be deploying, it requires running migrations on a database to pre-populate tables and some data. I already took that liberty with this database to skip some steps, and I'm going to click create. And within a second, it should start streaming the application's logs similar to what was done on the command line. This time, it should automatically detect that it's a Python application. I didn't have to tell it to do that. It automatically detected that with the presence of a requirements.txt file. It is setting the version of Python to 3.12, and it's also going to be installing the Python packages using pip. Very similar to how you would do it with many other platforms or even locally. And hopefully it should detect that I'm using a Postgres database. And there you go, install the psychopg2 Python Postgres library for me automatically. And it completed, exported the layers, and that is done. And this is actually the active application logs already booted up. And it looks like it's running. So let's close this and confirm. Click done. If I click on the routes, there it is. There's the auto-generated URL, and there's the application that is already deployed. And this data is actually already from the database that was pre-populated. And this is an example of some of the data in there. So this is two examples of going from code to URL in one push, the promise of SidePro. I'm going to release other videos showing you other aspects of the platform. Thanks very much for watching.